Good morning, class. My name is Miss Tienda, and today we're going to be talking about the theme of strong women. Now, what I think of when I say strong women is powerful women, and women who are not afraid to stand up for what they believe in, and who are not afraid to stand up for themselves. So these are women who are not afraid of doing what they want, being who they want to be, following their passion, and most importantly, they do not care about what other people think about them. Now, in the last 2 weeks, we've been reading a book called The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, and we've watched the movie The Color Purple, which is based on a novel by Alice Walker. And in this book and film, we've actually explored this theme of strong women. Today we're going to be comparing and contrasting the main characters of The House on Mango Street and The Color Purple. We'll be exploring themes, characters, messages, plots, conflicts, relationships, and resolutions that they may have in common, as well as how they're different. And we're also going to be comparing the writing styles between the two authors, from Sandra Cisneros and Alice Walker. So to compare and contrast, I'm going to be using this graph. Here we're going to put the differences between our characters and the author's writing styles, and here we're going to put their similarities. On the left-hand side, I'm going to put The House on Mango Street, and on the right-hand side, I'm going to put The Color Purple. Now first, I want to talk about The House on Mango Street. So our main character for this story is Esperanza. So Esperanza is a Mexican-American female who does not feel like she belongs in her Latino neighborhood based in Chicago. Now she lives on Mango Street. Throughout the book, she has feelings of isolation and she feels ashamed of where she lives in. So she wants to leave Mango Street. Now I want to briefly discuss the writing styles of Cisneros. So Sandra Cisneros, tells the story of Esperanza through a series of vignettes, which are just short, descriptive stories or passages that capture a moment in time. Now, Cisneros uses a lot of imagery and metaphors in these stories to really capture what Esperanza's life is like. Now I want to talk about our character Celie in The Color Purple. So Celie is an African-American girl who was married off by her father to an abusive man named Albert. So at first, Celie accepts this mistreatment and this abuse from Albert, thinking that she'd be rewarded in heaven if she just, got through this life of misery. And she thought that her life now was only temporary. And this is evident when we see that she tells Harpo to beat his wife, who we'll later talk about. She tells Harpo's wife that this life is only temporary and that heaven will reward her. Celie lives in Georgia, and this story takes place in the early 1930s. Celie is separated from her sister at a young age, and throughout the film, we see that she has these companionships, and later on she starts gaining hope that she'll once again see her sister. So someone comes into Celie's life that changes her perspective about how she feels about this mistreatment and how she feels about God. And this character, which is a very important character in this book and this movie, is Shug Avery. Shug Avery helps Celie realize that God doesn't base someone's worth on their sins. And our character Celie finds companionship in Shug Avery. The Color Purple uses a lot of symbolism to show that for Celie, God is salvation. Now this movie also explores strong female relationships. So between all these women, there's a strong relationship that we see throughout the movie. We also see the disruption of traditional roles, and it shows how important it is to have a voice. Now I want to discuss Alice Walker's writing style. So, in Alice Walker's book and the movie, she actually uses letters to God, so letters to God from Celie, and those letters actually allow us to understand and know what Celie is thinking and what she is hoping. And at first, Celie thinks that God is just some white man, but later finds out from Shug Avery that God is in everyone and everything, including nature. And before we move on, I want to talk about the similarities in writing styles between the two authors. So, some similarities in their writing styles are that these girls are talking somewhat uneducated and informal, and they're also told in short stories. So Sandra Cisneros actually says in the beginning of her book that her story of the house on Mango Street is meant to be informal from the perspective of a young girl. The Color Purple is also told informally. At the beginning, we see Celie talking, and she is uneducated and she's hardly able to read, but later on she transforms into a very well-educated woman who knows how to express her feelings, her thoughts, and takes action for her life. Now, I want to discuss some similarities between the characters. So here I've made some of the most important bullet points of similarities that these two characters have. So let's take a look. First of all, both Celie and Esperanza live in households governed by men. So both of these characters find happiness in leaving their complacent lives. What I mean by them leaving their complacent lives is Celie leaving Albert, her life with Albert, and Esperanza leaving her life in Mango Street. We do see that Celie is first intrigued by Shug Avery after looking at a photo of her. She finds her glamorous, and she just has to see her when she first meets her. Similarly, Esperanza goes through the same thing when she first meets Sally. She thinks that she's fabulous, that she's glamorous, and that she has this glamorous life because of her relationship with boys and because of her features. But unlike Sally, Shug Avery actually sticks to Celie and supports her and helps her throughout the story. However, Sally often pursued boys, and she chose them over Esperanza. So Sally was not a good friend to Esperanza, but Shug Avery was a good friend to Celie. So both these characters do recognize that their friends somewhat live trapped lives, and they vow to never let those kinds of things happen to them. So they refuse to be stuck in stereotypes or households governed by men. By the end of both of these stories, both of these girls turn into strong women. The women that we look up to, the women that they wanted to be. So Esperanza leaves Mango Street to become something better, to do something with her writing, and to help the women in Mango Street. Now in The Color Purple, Celie leaves after finally gaining the courage to stand up to Albert. She gains that courage and consciousness and confronts him about all his abuse, all his mistreatment and oppression that she's been facing for years. So Celie leaves, she leaves with Shug Avery. Although both these characters face an internal conflict of overcoming complacency, they become the women that they want to be and abandon their complacent lives. Now Esperanza leaves Mango Street, and like I mentioned, Celie leaves her oppressed, abusive life with Albert. And before I end this lesson, I want to briefly discuss the role of women in these stories. So I want to discuss the important women in both of these stories and what their role is in these characters' lives. Now these are some important characters that I've listed here. For the house on Mango Street, I've listed Esperanza's great-grandmother, her mom, Rafaela, and Sally, like I mentioned earlier. For the color purple, I've put down Shug Avery, Nettie, and Sophia. Now these two stories do have contrasting roles. So for example, in the color purple, Celie aspires to be like these important women in the story. She wants to stand up for herself like these women do, like we see Shug Avery do, like we see Nettie do. Shug Avery is free, Nettie stands up for herself, and Sophia fights and stands up for herself throughout the story. Now, the house on Mango Street, however, shows Esperanza who she doesn't want to be. So she doesn't want to be stuck in the house governed by men. She doesn't want to lead lives like her mom, Rafaela, like Sally. She wants to become something of herself, do something with her writing and help these women, because she recognizes that these women can be more than what they are, that they can be who they want to be, that they can do something more with their lives, like how her mom mentions that she could have been something. The role of women in these stories is to help our characters change and become who they want to be. Whether it's by recognizing what you don't want in your life, or recognizing what you wish you had more of in your life. The courage to stand up for yourself, or the courage to become someone different, to lead a different life from the ones that all the women in your life have led. And the women in these stories do not want to let men govern them. So that was today's lesson. Again, my name is Miss Tienda, and I hope that you enjoyed the lesson and learned something new today about these stories and about strong women and this theme that we've been reading about in these stories.